There is a moment when a heart shatters so loudly, it seems the whole world must hear it. That was the night the Alpha King looked right through Sue and crowned her cruel sister as his Luna. But he forgot one crucial detail. An alpha can lie, but his wolf never does. Sue was born into the Frost Peak Pack, a brutal, war-torn territory in the northern mountains, where survival was the only currency that mattered. In a medieval world dictated by the sharpness of claws and the strength of bloodlines, being an Omega was a death sentence she had to endure every single day. She didn't have titles or grand prophecies attached to her birth. Sue was the runt, the disappointment, the punching bag of her father, Lord Arthur Hastings. Her sister, however, was a different story. Bianca was the golden child of Frost Peak. Tall, ruthless, and possessing a coat of pure, glistening silver, she was the warrior daughter their father had always wanted. She was trained with broadswords and battle axes, praised for her lethal precision, and groomed for absolute power. Sue, on the other hand, was relegated to the kitchens, forced to scrub stone floors until her fingers bled, wearing rags that barely kept the biting mountain frost at bay. Bianca didn't just ignore her sister. She made Sue's misery her personal entertainment. If a suitor so much as glanced at the Omega with pity, Bianca ensured Sue spent the night locked in the freezing root cellar. The rumor spread like wildfire on a bleak November evening. Alpha King Alaric of the Crimson Howl was coming. King Alaric was a living legend, a conqueror who had united the southern territories through sheer, terrifying force. He was touring the northern borders to forge a permanent alliance against the feral rogue factions threatening the kingdom. But there was another, far more desperate reason for his arrival. The king was 28, and he had not yet found his true mate. A king without a Luna was viewed as unstable. His beast, infamous for its massive size and unchecked rage, was said to be growing feral, requiring a powerful anchor to keep it from consuming his humanity. Lord Hastings saw the ultimate opportunity. He planned to offer Bianca to the king, sealing an alliance that would make their family untouchable. The night of the welcoming banquet, the great hall was a sea of velvet, roasted meats, and roaring hearths. Sue was strictly forbidden from attending as a guest, ordered instead to serve wine to the high lords. She kept her head down, balancing a heavy silver pitcher, trying to remain invisible. Then the heavy oak doors shattered open. The wind howled through the hall, but it was nothing compared to the suffocating aura that rolled into the room. King Alaric stepped inside. There was a mountain of a man, clad in dark furs and black iron armor, his jaw sharp and his eyes a piercing, dangerous amber. His beta, Cedric, flanked his right, but nobody was looking at the guards. Everyone was paralyzed by the king. And then the scent hit Sue. It wasn't a gentle realization. It was a violent, physical crash, like lightning striking the base of her spine. The smell of crushed pine needles, dark earth, and ozone flooded her senses. The pitcher slipped from her trembling hands, crashing onto the stone floor, spilling crimson wine like blood. The entire hall fell silent. Alaric stopped dead in his tracks. His head snapped toward her. Across a room of 100 armed warriors and noble women, his golden eyes locked onto Sue's. The mate bond roared to life, a blinding, intoxicating pull that whispered one single word in her mind, mine. She saw his chest heave. She saw the immediate softening of his brutal features, the raw shock of recognition. The moon goddess had chosen her, the broken, abused Omega, to be the anchor to the most powerful Alpha in the world. For 3 seconds, Sue felt a desperate, soaring hope. She thought her nightmare was finally over. But Alaric was a king before he was a wolf. As he stared at her, his gaze dragged over her bruised wrists, her soot-stained dress, her frail frame shivering in the draught. She could physically see the calculations turning in his mind. He was looking at a kingdom on the brink of war. He needed a warrior. He needed a general. He needed power. Lord Hastings immediately rushed forward, stepping directly into Alaric's line of sight, blocking Sue from his view. "My king, forgive the clumsy wretch," her father sneered, before gesturing grandly to his side. "Allow me to present my eldest daughter, Bianca, the fiercest warrior in the north." Bianca stepped forward, clad in a breathtaking gown of midnight blue, exuding confidence and lethal grace. She bowed her head, but her eyes challenged the king. Alaric's amber eyes flickered back to Sue one last time. She saw the exact moment his human rationality crushed his wolf's instinct. He hardened his jaw, building a wall of pure ice over the bond. He turned his back on her. "She is magnificent, Lord Hastings," Alaric's voice boomed, deep and devoid of emotion. He extended a hand to her sister. "I accept your hospitality, and I look forward to getting to know the legendary Bianca." He rejected the bond without speaking the words, and in doing so, he drove a silver blade straight into Sue's soul. The next 3 days were a masterclass in psychological torture for the young Omega. The rejection of a mate bond doesn't just hurt feelings, it destroys a wolf on a cellular level. Without the formal words of rejection, I, King Alaric, reject you as my mate. The bond remains tethered, slowly rotting inside the chest of the unacknowledged partner. Because Sue was an Omega, her wolf was small, weak, and entirely unequipped to handle the immense pressure of an Alpha King's severed connection. She began to cough up black blood. Her skin turned violently pale, and she was consumed by a bone-deep, shivering fever. Yet Sue was forced to watch as the king courted her sister. They walked the battlements together. They hunted in the eastern woods. Alaric was a masterpiece of political composure, discussing troop movements and border fortifications with Bianca. He played the part of the smitten suitor perfectly to the court. But whenever his beta, Cedric, looked at him, Sue saw the panic in the second-in-command's eyes. Alaric was decaying too. He moved rigidly, his knuckles constantly white, his jaw clamped so tight it looked like bone would snap. Sometimes, Sue would catch him staring at the kitchen windows from the courtyard, his eyes flashing a terrifying, feral gold, before he would violently force the color back to human brown. His wolf was screaming, but Alaric was suffocating it beneath a mountain of duty. The climax of her torment came on the 4th night, the choosing ceremony. Lord Hastings had spared no expense. The great hall was draped in banners, and the music swelled as Alaric and Bianca sat together at the high table. Sue was ordered to stand in the shadows near the hearth, keeping the fires stoked. Every breath felt like inhaling broken glass. Her vision blurred. She leaned against the stone wall just to stay upright. King Alaric stood up, raising his golden goblet. The hall fell dead silent. "People of Frost Peak," Alaric's voice echoed, though it sounded strained, rougher than usual. The North has stood divided for too long, but tonight we forge an unbreakable chain." He turned to Bianca, whose eyes gleamed with triumphant arrogance. She had won. She had everything. "I have found the strength my kingdom requires. I, Alpha King Alaric, officially claim Bianca of House Hastings as my bride-to-be, and the future Luna of the Crimson Howl." The room erupted into deafening cheers. Bianca stood, wrapping her arms around Alaric's neck, pulling him down for a kiss. The moment her lips touched his, the fragile thread holding Sue's soul together snapped completely. A agonizing sob tore from the Omega's throat. It wasn't loud, but in the heightened senses of a werewolf caught, it might as well have been a gunshot. Bianca pulled back, glaring at her sister with pure venom. Their father's face went purple with rage. "Get that worthless trash out of my sight!" Lord Hastings roared, pointing a trembling finger at Sue. "Throw her into the winter woods. She is exiled from Frost Peak." The guards moved instantly, grabbing the girl by her bruised arms. She didn't fight. She couldn't. She was dying. They dragged her through the heavy oak doors, hauling her across the freezing mud of the courtyard, and threw her out past the heavy iron gates of the castle. The heavy metal slammed shut behind her. Sue was entirely alone in the howling blizzard, wearing nothing but a thin cotton dress. She stumbled blindly into the tree line, every step agony, until her knees buckled. She collapsed into a snowbank. The cold was a mercy, numbing the searing, burning fire in her chest. She closed her eyes, ready to let the moon goddess take her. But inside the great hall, hell was breaking loose. Sue didn't see it happen, but the tales of that night would be whispered in terrified tones for centuries. According to Cedric, the moment the heavy iron gates slammed shut, sealing her outside, something inside King Alaric broke. The kiss with Bianca had been the final trigger. When she touched him, Alaric's human consciousness completely collapsed. The king dropped his golden goblet. It clattered against the stone. Alaric grabbed his own head, a guttural, demonic sound ripping from his throat. "My king?" Bianca asked, her smug smile faltering. She reached for him again. "Do not touch me!" The voice that boomed from Alaric's mouth was not human. It was a legion of feral beasts, dark and ancient. The sheer force of the Alpha Command brought half the hall to their knees, including Lord Hastings. Alaric fell forward, bracing his hands on the heavy oak table. The wood instantly cracked under his grip. His bones began to snap and pop in a sickening symphony. This wasn't a normal shift. A werewolf's shift is supposed to be fluid, natural. Alaric was tearing himself apart. His wolf was violently ripping its way out of the human cage that had dared to deny its mate. "Restrain him!" Lord Hastings screamed in a panic, but Cedric drew his sword and stepped in front of his king, pointing the blade at the Northern Lord. "If you value your pathetic lives, no one moves," Cedric yelled, sweat pouring down his face. "The king is gone. Only the beast remains. Only the bull." With a roar that shook the dust from the rafters, Alaric's clothes shredded. He didn't shift into a normal wolf. The creature that stood atop the ruined high table was a lichen monstrosity, 9 feet tall, cloaked in midnight black fur, with claws like steel scythes and eyes burning with the fires of hell. The beast looked down at Bianca. The woman who was supposed to be a fearless warrior scrambled backward on the floor, weeping in pure, unadulterated terror. The wolf sneered at her, a low, rumbling growl vibrating through the floorboards. It didn't care about politics. It didn't care about wars, or alliances, or crowns. It only cared about one thing. The lichen vaulted over the table, landing in the center of the hall. Guards scattered like mice. The beast didn't look at them. It put its massive snout to the air, inhaling deeply. It caught the faint, dissipating scent of crushed pine needles and dark earth mixed with blood. Sue's scent. The king's wolf threw its head back and unleashed a howl so devastating it shattered the stained glass windows of the keep. Then it turned toward the massive front doors. It didn't bother opening them. The lichen slammed its massive shoulder into the reinforced oak, obliterating the wood into splinters, and charged into the raging blizzard, hunting for the mate its human half had so foolishly thrown away. The winter woods of Frost Peak were famously unforgiving. The blizzard whipped around Sue like a maelstrom of shattered glass, tearing at her thin cotton dress and biting into her exposed skin. She could no longer feel her fingers or toes. The agonizing, fiery pain of the rejected mate bond in her chest was slowly being replaced by the heavy, suffocating blanket of hypothermia. She curled into a tight ball beneath the roots of an ancient oak tree, her vision fading to a fuzzy, peaceful gray. She welcomed the silence. After 19 years of abuse at the hands of her father and her sister, the cold felt like a gentle friend, but the moon goddess was not finished with her. The ground beneath Sue's cheek began to vibrate. It wasn't the rhythmic thud of a horse's hooves. It was the heavy, catastrophic impact of something massive crashing through the forest. Trees splintered and snapped in the distance. The wind carried a terrifying, guttural roar that made the snow itself seem to tremble. Suddenly, the blizzard above her was blocked out by a towering shadow. Sue forced her heavy eyelids open. Standing over her was the monster from the Great Hall, King Alaric's lichen. In the pale moonlight bleeding through the storm, he was a nightmare of midnight fur, jagged bone spikes, and muscles corded like thick steel cables. His claws dug deeply into the frozen earth, and his breath plumed in great, violent clouds of steam. This was the beast that tore armies apart, the feral entity that Alaric had tried to bury beneath crowns and treaties. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the killing blow. She waited for those massive jaws to snap her neck and end her misery. Instead, she felt a blast of radiant, blistering heat. The lichen did not strike. He collapsed to his knees in the snow beside her. The terrifying demonic growl dissolved into a desperate, high-pitched whimper that sounded entirely too vulnerable for a creature of his size. Sue felt the gentle nudge of a wet nose against her freezing cheek. He inhaled deeply, burying his massive snout into her icy hair, taking in the scent of crushed pine and dark earth that belonged solely to her. She weakly opened her eyes to find his burning amber ones staring back at her. There was no politics in those eyes. There was no kingdom, no war, no Bianca. There was only pure, unadulterated devotion. "Alaric," Sue whispered, her voice a broken rasp. The beast let out a rumbling purr that vibrated through her chest, temporarily soothing the agony of the severed bond. He carefully, so incredibly carefully, scooped her frail, frozen body into his massive clawed arms. He pulled her against his chest, shielding her entirely from the blizzard with his immense bulk. His body heat was a roaring furnace, slowly thawing the ice in her veins. But Sue was still dying. The bond had been stretched too far, her Omega wolf too weak to survive the trauma of the rejection. She coughed, a splatter of dark blood staining the lichen's midnight fur. The beast panicked. He knew he was losing her. He knew human medicine could not save a soul dying from a shattered mate bond. There was only one absolute, ancient law of their kind that could reverse the decay. The lichen tilted her head back, exposing her bruised neck. He didn't ask for permission, and in her fading state, she couldn't have given it. With a sorrowful whine, he opened his jaws and sank his razor-sharp fangs into the juncture of her shoulder. It didn't hurt. The moment his teeth broke her skin, a blinding explosion of liquid fire surged through Sue's veins. It was the claiming mark. The lichen was forcing his own terrifying, limitless alpha vitality into her fading Omega soul, tethering her life to his. The rotting sickness in her chest vanished in an instant, replaced by a thrumming, vibrating power she had never felt before. Before she could process the miracle of the bond snapping back into place, the woods around them erupted in shouting. "There! Surround the beast! Bring out the silver nets!" It was her father, Lord Arthur Hastings. He marched into the clearing, flanked by 50 Frost Peak guards armed to the teeth. Behind him stood Bianca, clutching a heavy silver-laced crossbow. They hadn't come to rescue the king. They had come to subdue a feral monster to maintain their grip on power. The lichen's head snapped up. The gentle, desperate mate vanished, replaced instantly by the god of war. He stood up, placing Sue carefully behind him, shielding her recovering body. The beast let out a roar so deafening that several guards dropped their weapons and covered their ears in sheer terror. "Do not let him escape!" Bianca shrieked, aiming her crossbow. "He is feral. If we capture him, the Crimson Howl will owe us everything." They didn't understand. They were looking at a king they thought had lost his mind. They didn't realize they were looking at a husband protecting his bride. A volley of silver arrows flew through the air. The lichen didn't even flinch. He caught 3 arrows out of the air with a swipe of his massive hand, the silver searing his flesh, but he felt no pain, only rage. He lunged forward. The speed of the massive creature was incomprehensible. In seconds, he tore through the front line of guards, tossing grown men in iron armor through the air like rag dolls. He was a force of absolute destruction, ripping through the silver nets and shattering broadswords with his bare teeth. Lord Hastings fell to the ground, scrambling backward as the lichen loomed over him, claws raised to decapitate the man who had ordered his mate's death. "Stop!" Sue screamed. The word tore from her throat, fueled by the new, surging alpha energy flowing through her veins. The lichen froze. An inch from her father's face, the beast's claws stopped in midair. The monster that could not be controlled by armies, silver, or kings, completely submitted to her voice. He turned slowly, his chest heaving, his fur matted with snow and blood. He looked at Sue, tilting his head, waiting for her command. The entire clearing fell dead silent. The surviving guards stared in horrified awe as the all-powerful Alpha King bowed his massive head to the abused barefoot Omega in the snow. Beta Cedric burst through the tree line with the royal guard of the Crimson Howl, their swords drawn. Cedric took one look at the carnage, at Lord Hastings cowering in the mud, and at the colossal beast kneeling before the Omega. Cedric immediately dropped his sword and dropped to one knee. "Long live the Luna!" Cedric bellowed into the winter night. One by one, the royal guard fell to their knees in the snow, bowing to Sue. The hierarchy had been rewritten in blood and frost. Sue woke up 3 days later in the Obsidian Citadel, the impregnable capital of the Crimson Howl Pack. She was wrapped in silks and furs in a bed large enough to comfortably fit 10 people. The scent of pine and dark earth was so concentrated here, it made her head spin with comfort. She sat up, her fingers brushing against the heavy, pulsing scar on her neck, the royal claiming mark. "You're awake." She turned. Sitting in a heavy velvet chair by the roaring fireplace was Alaric. He was back in his human form, but he looked completely different from the stoic, ice-cold conqueror she had seen in Frost Peak. He looked exhausted, his hair disheveled, deep dark circles under his golden eyes. The moment their eyes met, he slid out of the chair and dropped to his knees beside the bed. The most feared king in the realm bowed his head until his forehead rested against her knuckles. "I am so sorry," Alaric whispered, his voice trembling with a raw, agonizing guilt. "I was a fool. I let the crown blind me to my soul. I tried to calculate a war, and in doing so, I nearly murdered the only thing that mattered. My wolf had to break my mind to save you. And I thank the goddess every second that he did." Sue looked down at this magnificent, terrifying man. Her whole life, she had been taught that power was cruel. But as she touched his hair, feeling him lean into her touch like a starved man, she realized true power was vulnerability. "We are bonded now, Alaric," Sue said softly, her voice holding a calm authority that surprised even her. "The frost is behind us." But the drama of the North was far from over. Within a week, reports reached the Citadel that Lord Hastings and Bianca had not accepted their humiliation. Exiled and stripped of their royal alliance, Bianca's pride had driven her to madness. She had secretly reached out to Gideon, the ruthless alpha of the feral rogue factions in the eastern wastes. Bianca promised Gideon the strategic maps of the Crimson Howl's border defenses in exchange for his army helping her usurp the throne she believed was rightfully hers. They were marching on the Obsidian Citadel. The Royal Council was in a panic. During a tense war room meeting, Lord Genevieve, the eldest historian of the pack, brought forth a dusty, ancient tome to the heavy stone table. "King Alaric, you have chosen an Omega as your Luna," Lord Genevieve said, adjusting her spectacles. "Many in the kingdom doubt her ability to lead in wartime, but they are ignorant of the ancient bloodlines. Sue is not just a weak wolf. She is a descendant of the first weavers." Genevieve opened the book, revealing an ancient script. "When the Alpha's rage boils the oceans, only the white Omega can command the tide. She is not forged for the sword, but for the soul of the pack. Where the Alpha brings the storm, she is the impenetrable shelter." To prove her point, Genevieve placed a parchment on the table, outlining the differences recorded in pack history between a true and false anchor. "Your mate is not a liability, my king," Genevieve stated firmly. "She is the ultimate shield." The true test of those words came 2 nights later, when Gideon's rogue army, guided by Bianca and her father, breached the outer courtyard of the citadel. The night was bathed in fire and blood. Alaric, in his towering lichen form, led the royal guard into the fray, tearing through the rogue forces with devastating brutality. But Bianca had a plan. While the battle raged at the gates, she slipped through the castle's secret servant passages, routes only a noblewoman obsessed with castle architecture would know. She bypassed the guards and kicked open the doors to the throne room, where Sue stood waiting. Bianca looked deranged. Her silver dress was torn, her eyes wild with jealousy and hatred. In her hand, she held a dagger dripping with liquid silver wolfsbane. "You stole my crown, you pathetic runt!" Bianca screamed, lunging at her sister. "You were meant to die in the snow!" She thrust the dagger toward Sue's heart. But the Omega didn't cower. She didn't run. The alpha blood from Alaric's bite surged through her veins, unlocking the dormant, suppressed power of her ancient lineage. She didn't just step aside. She caught her sister's wrist. Bianca gasped in shock as Sue's grip closed around her arm like a vice of solid steel. Sue's eyes, usually a soft brown, flared a blinding, luminescent white. "I didn't steal your crown, Bianca," Sue said, her voice echoing with a strange, harmonic resonance that forced her sister's wolf to whimper in submission. "You threw it away the moment you lacked the heart to wear it." With a flick of her wrist, Sue disarmed her, sending the silver dagger clattering across the stone floor. She pushed her dominant aura outward, a wave of absolute, crushing peace that acts as the ultimate weapon of a true Omega. Bianca collapsed to her knees, weeping uncontrollably as the sheer emotional weight of her sins crashed into her mind. When the battle outside concluded, Alaric threw the broken, defeated rogue Alpha Gideon at the steps of the throne room. Lord Hastings had perished in the courtyard. Alaric shifted back to his human form, covered in the blood of his enemies, and walked up the dais to stand beside his mate. He looked down at Bianca, who was still sobbing on the floor, broken by her own malice. "Take her to the dungeons," Alaric commanded his guards, his voice devoid of pity. "Let her spend the rest of her days in the dark, remembering the sister she threw into the snow." He turned to Sue, taking her hands in his. The entire court, bloody and bruised from the battle, filtered into the throne room. They looked at their king, whole and sane, and they looked at Sue, the rejected Omega, who had broken an army without shedding a single drop of blood. Under the light of a full, brilliant moon, King Alaric placed the heavy silver and sapphire crown of the Crimson Howl upon Sue's head. The roar of the pack shook the foundations of the earth. She was no longer the runt of Frost Peak. Sue was the true Luna, the anchor to the beast, and the heart of the greatest kingdom the world had ever known. Did you love this dramatic tale of betrayal, feral instincts, and ultimate revenge? Sue's journey from a rejected, abused Omega to the most powerful. Luna in history proves that true strength isn't about how hard you can strike, but how fiercely you can love. If your heart raced during the king's feral transformation, smash that like button. Don't forget to share this story with your pack and subscribe to the channel for more epic werewolf romance dramas every week.